Welcome everyone. I hope you're enjoying Canvas 24 so far. I am Tony, head of product for AI at Miro, and I'm absolutely thrilled to host this session with John from Design Sprint Academy.
Hi,
John, welcome to the session, and thank you so much for joining us remotely.
Tony. Thanks for having me in this amazing session.
So, for all of you that have maybe watched the Canvas 24 keynote, you might have heard an announcement today that we are about to launch Miro prototypes, which I'm extremely excited about, obviously. Um, well, today in this 30-minute session, we'll be diving into how prototype is accelerating product innovation in Miro and how it can actually help accelerate the full workflow, and ultimately how this makes your workflow faster and more collaborative. To set the stage, let's have a quick recap of the history of prototyping and how prototyping has evolved. So, traditionally speaking, prototyping involved time-consuming processes like paper sketches or basic wireframes. These methods work. Some of us have been using this for years, and they are useful, but they obviously have limitations in terms of fidelity and the ability to quickly prototype. Then we went into digital prototyping, and now we're entering the phase of AI. But honestly, if we look back at this history, I've always been fascinated to see how mobile app prototypes in paper with interactive states could actually just provide people enough value to just go from their processes for designing and developing new product, although it's slow. So John, from your experience on at Design Sprint Academy, how have you seen prototyping methods change over the years? How would you summarize the major shifts that have happened?
I think I had a very similar experience to yours, starting with paper prototyping initially, designers sketching things on paper and then trying to kind of recreate functionality. Then we had tools like InVision coming along, and that has been a big step forward. Very useful, but still requiring a lot of expertise to make it happen. And this was like a good scenario, but we've also done prototyping with PowerPoint and Keynote, and we had things looking a little bit childish, unfinished, but it was all we could do. So that's kind of my experience with it. And now we're in the era of AI, and that's what we're going to want to talk about. Can't wait.
This is great, and I think what you're highlighting before with people using prototyping with PowerPoint and Keynote is a really good segue to this slide, which is what we believe strongly about, which is prototyping should always be a team sport. It's all about providing a place for the entire team to get together to collaborate, ideate, visualize ideas. And so it should be inclusive, it should be open. And I think the reason why people default to use, as you highlighted, Keynote, PowerPoint, is that these are the tools that everybody know how to use. And although
Right.
they're not made for prototyping and can lead to what you describe as childish results,
Mhm.
it's ultimately a solution that everybody can use and contribute
Exactly.
to. But what we believe is really important with this new AI trend is that AI can make it easier for everyone in a team to take an active part in the process without having to rely on some of these tools that are not made for this. And that's the reason we actually built Wizard. So now for the audience, you're watching a Miro Canvas 24 presentation, so you're probably wondering why are we talking about Wizard? So Wizard is a company building an AI-powered prototyping tool, which was acquired by Miro early this year. I co-founded Wizard in 2018, and we're extremely fortunate that John and his team have been early adopters of Wizard back when our product barely worked, back early days, early phase of any product. And so we're currently hard at work bringing the technology powering Wizard into Miro, but John can already share with you all how his team have been using Wizard to help large organizations innovate over the past few years. Now I'm going to hand it over to John, who's going to tell you all about how Design Sprint Academy teaches product and innovation managers to align on decision making and validate new product ideas. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tony. Let me just take this over. Okay, I should be presenting now. Good. So let's start. We're talking about prototyping here, but first I want to set the stage and explain in which context we're using prototyping. And we're using prototyping in the context of product innovation when we're helping teams come up with new value propositions, create new products or big new features, sorry, or when they're starting this risky project. So how it typically starts, you have this idea of a new product based on which you form your product hypothesis. And then we identify, okay, who's our ideal customer user who would be using this product. And this is the target audience that we're prototyping and testing with. And then once you have the target user, you're finding a problem for them to solve using problem framing. And then with design sprints, you're creating a value proposition which you prototype and test and learn whether it works or not. If it works, then you move into the next phases where you actually build this product. If it doesn't, you go through this cycle until you get your product market fit. So that's the context in which we're prototyping. As I mentioned, we're using for this a process called design sprint, and prototyping is a big part of it. And just to explain a little bit what design sprint is, so it's very clear how we use prototyping here. The design sprint is a structured problem-solving process in which a cross-functional team of experts tackle this big product idea, and in the span of a week, 4 or 5 days, they build a prototype and they test it with their target audience, seeing if it works or if it doesn't. This is a structured process. It has very clear phases over 4 days. And here's just a quick overview of how these phases work. The design sprint starts by understanding the problem, in which every member of the team shares their perspective and basically get to a common understanding of the problem they're facing with. And then once this is clear, they define what success looks like. Part of this is defining their biggest assumptions, the big questions that they want to answer, the big unknowns, the blockers, the risk in front of their product. And this is very important because when you prototype, you need to prototype with intention. Like, you need to know what you're finding out. It's not just about building a nice mock-up that you're showing to the customers. So that's critical to prototyping. Then once this is done, every member of the team sketches unique solutions to this problem. So if you have 7 to 10 people in this workshop, you end up with 7 to 10 competing solutions on how to solve this problem. And then, of course, you decide which are the best of them. With this best of ideas, you take them, and that's something that we prototype, right? We turn them into a realistic facade of our product or service. And then this prototype, you put it in front of your customer audience and you test with 5 users at the end of the week, and then you see how your product is received. So that's kind of like how design sprints work. And as you can see, prototyping is a huge part of this. At the end of the design sprint, what you're going to get is this user-tested prototype, and you know what works, what doesn't work, and most importantly, you know why, right? Like, there's a lot of learning in a very short term. We use the design sprint and testing prototypes here to see what is the desirability of our product. That's the main focus of doing such a process. Viability and feasibility, that comes later, but the initial point is the desirability. So now we're talking about prototyping. I want to go back to the prototyping in a design sprint. As I mentioned, in a design sprint, we have a cross-functional team of experts, and you have to imagine they're not designers. Actually, hardly any of them are designers. You get people from sales, from marketing, you have product managers, you have your engineers in it, different type of stakeholders, and they're there because they have expertise on the topic, right? So, but they don't know design. They don't know how to prototype. That's not their day-to-day business. And of course, when it comes to prototyping, they have challenges. First of all, you need to have your prototype as functional as you can, right? So you can mimic the real product. That's a challenge for people who don't have this skill set. Not only that, but you need to build it fast. You have 1 day or less to build this prototype. Again, for someone who doesn't have the skills, that's a big task. And finally, you need to know design, not necessarily to build pretty screens, but to know what to include in your prototype to learn the answers to your questions. to validate your assumptions, right? Like that takes a certain skill set. Actually, being a designer sometimes can get here in the way because designers are perfectionists, and instead of just having a prototype that's just enough to learn, you might end up with too polished of a product, which is not what we need at this stage. So plenty of challenges with prototyping in design sprints, and actually this is one of the most important things that we need to address. And that's when we discovered Wizard. Tony, as you mentioned, the product wasn't perfect at the very beginning. I know after our initial call, I think we needed about a couple of years to adopt Wizard. But like what really hooked me was your tagline at the time, where you said, prototyping tool for non-designers. And I was like, yes, this is what I need. I hope it works. So we started using Wizard. There was no AI at the time, but was still very powerful because all of a sudden we didn't need an expert prototyper in our design sprint. And then all the team, everyone could use Wizard out of the gate, collaborating and building. And we could do it very quickly, which is very important. So in the end, what Wizard did for our teams was like it democratized prototyping, right? Like the teams were able to work cross-functionally across all of the stages of the design sprint, ideating, making decisions. It wasn't the case for prototyping until Wizard came along. So it gave everyone here the opportunity to participate. As you said, Tony, a team sport, right? Wizard made that happen. And it works across industries, it works across cultures. We've used it all over the world with teams in our design sprint workshops and training, and it worked every single time. And I want to go back to how it works, the prototyping part, and why Wizard is such an amazing tool. In our design sprint workshops, the output is something like you see on the screens. People are sketching their ideas of the product. As you can see on this, as you can see on these sketches, these are hardly polished interfaces, right? Like where people here are not trying to do the best appealing, visually appealing work, but they're trying to put their ideas down on paper, which is what we need. And it's totally fine, but we still need to create the product afterwards. So they sketch their ideas, we vote for them, they vote what are the best ones, and that's something that then gets turned into a storyboard, right? And the storyboard is a blueprint for your prototyping. It looks a little bit better, almost like a wireframe, but it's still not there. And then what we're doing with Wizard, we're taking this storyboard, and then with Auto Designer, we're turning that storyboard into a nice prototype. That's how we're doing it. And now I want to show you a little demo. For this, I have a use case of a storyboard of a product that we want to prototype. It's something that we use in our workshops. It's basically, I'm going to quickly explain what it is, just so you have the context and see the result of Wizard. So basically, this is a gift shopping app in which the recipient of the gift gets an email saying, hey, you received this book from Anna. How do you like it? If it's a 5-star rating, everyone is happy. So that's not the most interesting path. But if there is a less than 5-star rating, like a 3-star rating, obviously there is a problem with the gift. The app is asking, what's the problem? And then you have different reasons. And then there is an option to trade the gift you don't like for something that you like. So you're going to a trade page where you have different gift options. You choose one that you like, and then you get that to the shopping cart. As you can see, we have some questions that we're trying to learn answers in testing. So that's kind of what we want to turn into a prototype. So now let's see some Wizard magic in action. All right, this is Wizard. As you can see, we have plenty of prototypes here that our teams have built, dozens of them. But now let's build our one with Auto Designer. So I'm starting Auto Designers. I'm giving a prompt, create a gift shopping site where users can review gifts, provide feedback and trade them with other items, and then include the following pages, right? And we have the pages we want to include. Click continue. Here you can generate your theme. I'm a little bit lazy, so I'm just going to use the prompt and the predefined options, light, what else? artsy maybe. Of course, I could write something there as well, but I'll just trust Wizard and I click generate my project now. So let's
This is
go, generate my project.
this
And
is the
now
moment where
magic
we
is happening.
joked. Yeah, this is the moment where we tend to joke that we should have like some kind of like elevator music, so we can go get a coffee, have a little music to wait. But so in the background for the audience, we are basically using the prompt to understand what is user requesting and then finding the relevant screen that will match that request. So we generate all the different screens, the components, map the content, so text and images, and then apply the style as well. And then we return the result back into the interface.
And here it is. All right, so I like how we have a first choice and then additional design proposals. As a matter of fact, the additional proposal was a little bit better, Tony. Like maybe you can tell me why. But this is the prototype that we have. As you can see here, there are like some new ideas we didn't have in our storyboard, which is great. It could enhance our prototype as well. But what I wanna show is the other ones. So we can still be using this, but if we're going here in additional design proposal, you can see a list of received gifts, pretty similar to what we had. We only had one, but we can remove some. We have a review and feedback page, and then we have a trade page. So basically all of the options that we had in our storyboard, now we can see them in the generated prototype. Then of course the shopping cart at the very end. The good news is it only took 2 minutes to get to this stage with copywriting, with images. Of course, this can be polished afterwards and you have all of the tools to do it, but it gives you such an amazing starting point. You have one day to work through this. And then each screen, we can take auto designers and go through every screen and just change it and refine it during the day. So it's an amazing way to accelerate prototyping. Tony, do you want to add anything to this?
No, this is a great. I love to see these like case studies where the tool is used in the wild to solve real problems. So thanks a lot for sharing, John.
My pleasure. So to wrap this up, we're using prototyping in these three scenarios when we're validating desirability. First, to the risk product development. Design sprints are a big part of product discovery because you're going to involve your entire team to validate what you're going to build before you're actually building. So this is a very straightforward scenario. Also, it should be used in innovation where you have lots of ideas in your funnel. Then with design sprint and prototyping, you can just select those ones that are promising. And then finally, you can use it when you're trying to find product market fit. I showed this at the beginning, but you're starting with your product vision, hypothesis, and then you're testing and prototyping your value proposition before you're committing to building it. And that was my presentation. I hope you found it useful. And then, Tony, I will let you wrap up with some key benefits of prototyping.
Thanks a lot, John. This is great. And again, like I love to see Wizard being used in the wild. And I mean, I just can't wait to have this as part of Miro, so we can help team, iterate faster through design sprint or any other kind of like process they use internally. So what you showed was a really good example of how prototyping can greatly uplift the design sprint process, but also lead to better outcome for the team. So if we are to summarize the key benefits of prototyping that I've noted, the first one is testing hypothesis. As John mentioned, we have tons of ideas, we have tons of assumptions of what we think users want, of how we think we can solve a given problem. But unless you see those solutions in your hand that you can interact with and test, it's really hard to test those hypotheses and validate assumptions. Second, as John also mentioned, we can validate desirability by showing the prototype to prospective users. So before we even spend a single day implementing it with developers, we already get signal on whether or not this is the right thing to do, which I absolutely love. You save time, you save resources, and you can move faster to market. Third, by testing and validating user flows through prototyping, we also greatly de-risk product development because ultimately the developers don't waste time building the wrong thing. We already have great signals that this is the right thing to do. And finally, fourth, this it enables us to just communicate with stakeholders much more efficiently. Sometimes I like, this is a famous, how do you say, expression within the design community. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Like if I see it, I understand much better what it is that we're talking about, and we can better align with stakeholders, which is also a great benefit. And of course, if you look at those four benefits together, the goal here is to accelerate time to market. And if on top of this you add AI, you greatly accelerate time to market by an order of magnitude because things get faster. You can generate ideas with AI, you can iterate with AI, and ultimately you can also enable more people to take an active role in that design process, which ultimately help also accelerate your process. John, do you think there's anything that I might forgot to mention or emphasize here with regard to the key benefits of prototyping?
Two things I want to add. Actually, I don't want to add, but just build on top of what you're saying. Aligning with stakeholders, yes, super important. Not only because a picture is 1,000 words, because it's not only that they see it, but they're being an active part of it, right? They're making that picture. So I think that's so critical, right? So they're part of it. And then the other thing is AI. We were able to use Wizard even without AI, but I think the AI piece took things to a whole new level, not only because we're generating a foundation of our prototype so quickly, but then it gives people abilities like copywriting. Those prototypes need to have credible data and text in it and messaging, and Wizard does that, which is amazing, for example. And then just the ability to work with the AI as if it was your designer and then go screen by screen. I think those are like super powerful features that you have and are very, very useful for the teams so they can all work on the prototype. And then when you have AI, they get excited about it because it's almost like in play mode. Like, let's see what it can do, right? So they get hooked into the prototyping, and that's amazing.
Thanks a lot, John. I mean, this meant the world to me to hear some of these, actual story in the wild of how this is actually unlocking teams. I love it. Um, well, this is already the end. All right, everyone, this is the end of the session. Massive thanks to John from Design Sprint Academy for joining us. And
thank you for having me.
That's awesome. And I can't wait to see what we can do once all the features you've highlighted, John, are going to be part of Miro. So stay tuned, everyone. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of Canvas 24.
Thank you.